Hey guys, welcome to Med School Made Easy. So during this video we are going to talk about the triangles of the neck. So we will see what those triangles are and the boundaries as well as the contents of these triangles. So the triangles of the neck are mainly of two types, which is the anterior triangle and there's the posterior triangle. And the anterior triangle can be divided into four types, which are the submental, digastric, carotid, and the muscular triangles. And the posterior triangle can be further divided into the occipital triangle as well as the supraclavicular triangle. So now we'll have a look at the boundaries of the anterior triangle. So anteriorly it is bounded by the median plane of the neck, and posteriorly there's the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and superiorly the base of the mandible and the line joining the angle of the mandible to the mastoid process. And the apex of the triangle lies above the manubrium sterni. And now we'll move on to look at the subdivisions of the anterior triangle. So first there is the submental triangle. So on each side there is the anterior belly of the corresponding digastric muscles, and the base of the triangle is formed by the body of the hyoid bone, and the apex lies at the chin, and the floor of the triangle is formed by the right and the left mylohyoid muscles and the median raphe uniting them. And then the digastric triangle or the submandibular triangle, anterior-inferiorly there is the anterior belly of the digastric muscle, and then posterior-inferiorly there's the posterior belly of the digastric and the stylohyoid muscles, and superiorly there's the base of the mandible and a line joining the angle of the mandible to the mastoid process, and the roof is formed by the skin, the superficial fascia, and the deep fascia, and the floor is formed by the mylohyoid muscle anteriorly and the hyoglossus muscle posteriorly. And the carotid triangle right here, the boundaries are the so anterosuperiorly it has the posterior belly of the digastric muscle and the stylohyoid muscles, and antero-inferiorly there's the superior belly of the omohyoid muscle, and then posteriorly the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and the roof is formed by the skin, the superficial fascia, the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia, and the floor is formed by parts of the middle constrictor of the pharynx and the inferior constrictor muscles of the pharynx, and as well as the thyroid membrane. And then the muscular triangle, there's so the anterior part is formed by the anterior median line of the neck from hyoid bone to the sternum, and posterior superiorly there's the superior belly of the omohyoid muscle, and posterior inferiorly the anterior border of the sternum. So now moving on to the posterior triangle. So anteriorly we have the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and posteriorly it is bounded by the anterior border of the trapezius muscle, and inferiorly it is formed by the middle one-third of the clavicle, and the apex of the triangle lies on the superior nuchal line where the trapezius and the sternocleidomastoid muscles meet, and the roof is formed by the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia, and the floor is formed by the prevertebral layer of the deep cervical fascia. And now going to look at the two subdivisions of the posterior triangle, which are namely the occipital triangle and the subclavian triangle. So occipital triangle is anteriorly bounded by the sternocleidomastoid muscle and posteriorly by the trapezius muscle and inferiorly by the omohyoid muscle. And the floor of the occipital triangle is made up of the splenius capitis, the levator scapulae, and the scalenus medius and the scalenus posterior muscles. And then the subclavian triangle, superiorly there is the inferior belly of the omohyoid muscle, and inferiorly there's the middle 1/3 of the clavicle, and the base of the triangle is made up of the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And now we're going to talk about the contents of the anterior triangle. So, as I mentioned before, it has 4 subdivisions, which are namely the submental, digastric, carotid, and the muscular triangle. So, the submental triangle has 2 to 4 small submental lymph nodes and small submental veins which join to form the anterior jugular vein. And the digastric triangle, the anterior part of the triangle has the superficial part of the submandibular gland, the facial nerve, the submandibular lymph nodes, the submental artery, the mylohyoid vessels and the nerve, and the hypoglossal nerve. And the posterior part of the triangle has the lower part of the parotid gland, the external carotid artery, the styloglossus and the stylopharyngeus muscles, and the glossopharyngeal nerve, the pharyngeal branch of the vagus nerve, the styloid process, and a part of the parotid gland, and the internal carotid artery, as well as the internal jugular vein. And then the carotid triangle, and the arteries of the carotid triangle are the common carotid artery, the internal carotid artery, and the external carotid artery. And then the veins are the internal jugular vein, the common facial vein, the pharyngeal vein, and the lingual vein. And nerves include the vagus vein, the vagus nerve, the superior laryngeal branch of the vagus nerve, and the spinal accessory nerve, and the hypoglossal nerve, as well as the sympathetic chain. And the lymph nodes are deep cervical lymph nodes along the internal jugular vein. And the muscular triangle has the infrahyoid muscles, which are the sternohyoid, the sternothyroid, the thyrohyoid, and the omohyoid muscles. And now looking at the contents of the posterior triangle. So the occipital triangle has mainly nerves, vessels, and lymph nodes. So the nerves include the spinal accessory nerve and the 4 cutaneous branches of the cervical plexus, and the muscular branches, and the C5 and the C6 roots of the brachial plexus. And the vessels are the transverse cervical artery and the vein and the occipital artery. And the lymph nodes include the supraclavicular nodes and the occipital nodes. And moving on to the subclavian triangle, we have nerves, vessels, and lymph nodes as well. So the nerves include the 3 trunks of the brachial plexus, nerve to the serratus anterior muscle, and nerve to the subclavius, and the suprascapular nerve. Yeah, suprascapular nerve, and the vessels include third part of the subclavian artery and vein, and suprascapular artery and vein and transverse cervical artery, as well as the lower part of the external jugular vein. So thank you for watching, and I hope you guys found this video useful. So don't forget to subscribe and turn on the post notifications.